What's up, shipbuilders? Today we're going to walk through the build for the Enterprise. I think this ship fits the overall exploration theme of Starfield better than maybe any other. But that said, it was also one of my most tedious, frustrating builds that I probably revisited way too many times. Simply because it requires pieces to have angles that don't quite exist in the game. But I think this build finally finds the right balance between an Enterprise and maybe a Starfield look. And honestly, I think it results in a really powerful ship that looks quite imposing both in space and when it sits on a landing pad. So, as always, I'm going to slowly highlight each piece, disconnect them in chunks, and then put them back together rather than spend time talking about each piece individually. You can pause or rewind the video as you need to. And for this build, both due to just the large amount of pieces, but also the unique angles and how some of the pieces are kind of hidden and stacked together, I'm going to go a little bit slower and a bit smaller pieces, chunks, as I move along. What I will do is mention a few specific pieces in this build that I think are unique or critical to the build itself. The first one is the grav drive that we just started with. You could obviously use a different grav drive if you want to, but I think just the look, the cosmetics, the aesthetics of this grav drive really fit the front deflector on the actual Enterprise. And so I was quite pleased with how that just turned out and the look that it accomplished sitting where it does on this build. You'll obviously see I used a lot of these fuel tanks for the main hull just due to their rounded shape. They do add quite a bit of mass to the ship, which hurts the mobility, but in the end I decided to keep them just because I wanted that rounded look of the ship. It's obviously excessive amount of fuel, and you could fly back and forth to Andromeda a few times if the game lets you, but it is what it is. Another thing I'll call out, and we'll get there as I'm disassembling this in a minute, is I hid a few extra engines kind of within the saucer part of the ship just to get a bit more mobility. So you'll see I've got a couple of these SAE 5660s kind of hidden underneath when we get there. Now these do snap into place normally. They aren't glitched in. You don't see them as you fly around. What you will see is you get a bit more mobility while still having a decent amount of cargo space. And the end result is we still get the more faithful look of the Enterprise with those back kind of twin, more rounded supernova engines that are facing out the back of the nacelles. So. So here are those SAE 5660s tucked away underneath, along with just some extra cargo. And once we move these over, you'll see that actually also hidden underneath, just one level up, is the shield generator. And I tucked that into the middle of this saucer part of the ship, just because it didn't sit anywhere else very well on the external part of the ship. It didn't look quite right. And so you'll find it here once we move some of these pieces out of the way and see how it kind of sits actually on right in that little hole there on top of that cargo. And so there you can see it. And it just hides away right there. I went with the Ares cockpit for this. It more or less fits the rounded bridge shape on the top of the saucer of the Enterprise, but also the interior of this cockpit, I think, quite closely, honestly, represents the Enterprise bridge from the original Star Trek. And so it's pretty cool to be standing up there and looking out over your entire ship from that gigantic bridge. Finally, the nacelles. They each have a rounded 3x1 Taio hab with some blue highlights. Now the support beams obviously are the most difficult to recreate just because we don't have any pieces that are angled at that 45 degrees like we'd like to in this game. I think these parts from Taio do a decent job, but if I'm honest, I secretly hope that we'll get some additional ship parts in a future update or DLC so we can have some pieces at various angles. And we'll put together the other side, and that'll wrap up the build for the Enterprise. As always, thanks for watching. Live long and prosper.